Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tembegile Felicia Makubele, and you have joined the session of Are We Transforming, where we're going to be discussing about free education, the Fees Must Fall campaign. We won't be waiting any longer because we have given it 2 hours. Well, allow me to welcome everybody who has taken time to join, but above everything, let me welcome my 3 guests. I SINQOBILE. Okay, she's still there. Okay, the first one is Zamam Tunzi, and then we've got NXUMALO, and then BONGANI MAHLANGU. All of those have been activists in the Fees Must Fall campaign. Are We Transforming is actually a platform where we have decided to bring everybody together, whether it's within South Africa or in Africa, to discuss different topics, identify gaps, and also areas of improvement. And then we develop reports, which we share with different stakeholders. So far, we have been able to sort of link different companies that are currently working together, both in the SADC region, and some are currently in South Africa, which has actually led to so many people now wanting to be on the platform, because it's also a networking platform. But above everything else, we try and identify things that we can collectively find solutions and be able to share with those who have got powers to be able to make the difference that they would want to. So our audience covers people from Nigeria, sometimes Zambia. Actually, Zambia is growing in terms of the people who support or who associate themselves with the platform. But for today, we decided to discuss the Fees Must Fall because the February is the month wherein many higher education institutions are going to be opening up. And the trend has been, there will always be, protests and, students not being admitted in the higher education institutions. But over and above that, I don't think we have ever come to a point where we discuss, is it only about having a paper, the Fees Must Fall campaign, for the people to graduate, because many are currently not working, which has got something to do with the economy. But over and above that, there are so many things that lead to these students not graduating. So we thought, let's bring those who have been involved and have experience and have also initiated this concept of the Fees Must Fall campaign to come and discuss with us what are the things that led to this starting. Obviously, poverty is one of those, but what is it that we can do going forward to improve and not focus only on having free education or having a certificate at some of the qualifications that people are going to school for still relevant. So I'm excited today because we're having the 3 guests as I've introduced them. So I'll allow them to actually do justice to saying briefly who they are. And then after that, I'll give them 10 minutes each to just state their view with regard to the topic of today. So I'll start with BONGANI. You can introduce yourself just briefly.
Good day to everyone. My name is BONGANI MAHLANGU. A former student leader. I was around 2015, 2016 during the peak of Fees Must Fall, because it didn't start then. There were protests many years prior to that. But I would say that was the climax that actually led to some movement forward. I've studied economics. And currently I'm in the South African Youth Council as well. And also I do apply my trade in government, local government. So yeah, thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you so much for making time. NXUMALO, if you're ready, please just do a short introduction.
Hi everyone, my name is NHLONIPHO. Sorry about not showing my face. I don't look proper. But anyway, I'm NXUMALO. The former Secretary General of the Wits SRC. Unfortunately, I was not part of the Fees Must Fall when it was at its peak during 2016, 2015. However, yeah, I am a student leader. I am an activist. I am a BA law graduate and currently pursuing my LLB. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Zama, over to you.
My name is Zama. Zama Mtunzi. I'm a political educator. I did my undergrad at Wits. I was there at the time of the 2015-2016 kind of uprising. I'm currently in Cape Town now, doing work around political education and kind of mobilization at a political education center called the Chisimani Center for Activist Education. So yeah, that's where I am.
Okay, you didn't say much about the fact that you also work for the organization that advocate for equal education, which I think we're gonna hear much about that. So thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for making time. We tried to go to get hold of somebody who was going to represent the Department of National Higher, for Higher Education Department, but we're told that they need to get approvals and it's gonna take a while. So we decided to go ahead with the session. Welcome to everybody, and I believe people are going to watch this session are going to also learn quite a lot from this. I'm also hoping that I'm going to learn and get to understand what was the thinking behind the Fees Must Fall and where are we now? Is it now a cliche, something that happens usually when the schools reopens or the universities reopens, or are you campaigning even when it's not during school time? So I'll start with Bongani again, just to take us through your view with regard to the topic, which we indicated that we want you to discuss about the qualifications that, the educational qualifications that currently people are studying towards, more especially considering the fact that there is a lot of, the scarce skills, but still people get to be put into the faculties which are considered to be common in a way. So just to share your views, I'll give you 10 minutes, but if you go overboard, it's fine. We're here to share and to listen to each other. Over to you.
All right, no, thanks. And these views of mine have always even made me somewhat unpopular to some of my peers, even back then when I was still actively involved in issues related to students. So now if we look at the courses being offered by most universities, or all universities, there are courses that are currently being offered that do not speak to the national agenda of South Africa. So that means that these courses do not contribute to the growth of the country, but then they are offered nonetheless. And this, if you had to look historically in terms of countries that were in positions such as ours, economic positions such as ours, where you did not have sufficient resources and you needed to use the resources that you have in order to ensure that you grow the country so you can have more resources and are able to do other things. What we are currently doing in this country is inconsistent with that. I make reference to when there's a popular quote that most people use in student politics by Lenin, when he said better, fewer, but better. So when Lenin said better, fewer, but better, I think it was around 1776 during the Soviet Union, he was referring, it was a speech that was making to students or young people that had been identified who had serious potential, and they were being given scholarships to go and study abroad in the US, in Germany, the UK, and other countries to acquire certain skills that are required by the Soviet Union in order to come back to the country and build state apparatus. So he said better, fewer, but better, on the basis that the country then did not have sufficient resources to be funding everyone to study whatever it is that they liked. So they had to channel the few resources or the scarce resources in things that they know that would have highest yield. So that was the better, fewer, but better, because we know that these people would come back. So now there was a focus in terms of spending of resources or consumption of resources. You can even then go to in China, around 1978 under then Deng Xiaoping. So Deng Xiaoping was trying to rebuild the Chinese scientific community, trying to move away from the anti-intellectual cultural revolution that came before. So Deng also then takes the few resources that China had at the time, spends it on young people or people that were identified to have serious potential to build the country, gives them scholarship, knowing that some might not actually come back. They go and study abroad. Some did come back, and those that came back then assisted in building the China that we see, applaud, and want to emulate to some extent today. So that takes place as well in South Korea. South Korea as well, when they were still building their country. Remember, it used to be one of the poorest countries in the world. They do the same. So now we bring it then forward to our country, where you have resources. Our resources currently are not sufficient, but then you want to use those resources to fund what each and every course available in a university prospectus. And that cannot be right, because some courses do not speak to the national objectives as defined in the National Development Plan 2030, which is the strategic national, which outlines strategic national goals. And then this funding obviously comes by means of NSFAS, where they always complain that hey, we don't have enough resources to be funding everyone, but yet the resources that you have, you're just funding each and every other course. And we are in a country that is not properly funding or financing its universities. And therefore, you find such courses being available at these institutions on that very same basis, that universities are underfunded. And because of universities are underfunded, they must make means in order to generate revenue or generate resources, either than government allocation by the means of subsidies. And this has caused universities to operate as predatory, or to adopt a predatory style of leadership, where now you find universities that it's a pay-per-use. So if you cannot pay a university, you cannot access. They offer these courses that they know very well that will not assist the student herself, will not assist the country, will not assist anyone. But because of this glamorization of academic education in South Africa over nated education, and when I mention nated education, I add also NCV education. So you find in South Africa, academic education is glamorized, more especially in our community, the Black community. So most people, when they qualify for university, they actually want to go there, and they're willing to take a course that they know as well that might not yield anything in the long run. So that means it might not lead to upward social mobility, does not speak to the growth interest of the country, but because it's funded by the same country that is not clear about its growth objectives, and universities offer it because universities have to make money, and they know that these courses will make money. So because of the glamorization, a lot of our people tend then to lean towards such institutions, and then they make it's just a money-making scheme. That's why you would find, I quote, the outgoing vice chancellor of the Northwest University, who would say that there are courses in universities today that teach students how to kill dinosaurs, and they offer those courses because there are people who actually want to learn how to kill dinosaurs. So that is just being sarcastic on the basis that dinosaurs no longer exist anymore, but there are courses that teach you that. So meaning, even if you have that skill you cannot really apply it anyway. So now, when, as I said, glamorization of academic education is more funded in this country, meaning more of subsidies go towards universities than they go towards TVETs and other structures. And then if you look at the nated education, as I said, it's the opposite. It's less funded, it's dullified, meaning that if you go to a TVET, for instance, It's as if you are less intelligent, maybe less academical or intellectually gifted than someone who goes to university to study a SWAC course. So that is the qualification that I'm referring to. And that time, TVET or native education, they give you workplace-based skill. You get practical and theory, and it speaks to a lot of the growth objectives that articulated in our NDP and other policy documents as well, such as industrialization or building an industrial economy. If you cannot do that without those skills, but yet it is underfunded, it's nullified. So a lot of young people do not consider it as a first option. They go there when they cannot find space or they cannot perform in terms of APS in accordance to access a university. So then that causes a lot of problems that we are currently seeing in this country. So in short, just to exit the platform now, is that yes, there are courses that are offered in universities today that speak to nothing at all. And it is because of our government that is not clear as to what it seeks to achieve. Because if it were clear, then those courses would not be offered at those universities, but there would be alternative for young people in order to get skilled, in order to be able to access the labor market if they so wish to access the labor market, or do whatever it is that they want to do. That's why even if you look into policies in South Africa, such as the National Skills Development Plan, it's a good document that is not properly being applied. Therefore, certain things still happen that in the way that they do. That's why from those National Development Act, that's where you find the birth of your sector education and training authorities, or SETAs, which are adequately funded by industry in South Africa, but you'll find that the uptake or their presence, or even young people or people knowing about them, is not adequate. Therefore, they become useless to some on the basis of the ignorance of what they seek to achieve. But if you look into the policy documents as to why they are there, it's quite good policies, but those good policies are not being applied. And hence we are seeing what we are seeing each and every year, where more and more people want to go to universities and they are willing to take about any course that they can gain access in at universities. And universities do not care as long as they make their profits end of the day and they're able to maintain their going concern on the basis that at least assists them to leverage and to mitigate against this underfunding that they're receiving from the state currently. Thanks.
I wrote so many questions as you were talking, and I think this is going to be quite an interesting discussion. I'm already seeing comments, but let me take the next guest, which will be NHLONIPHO, and then after that, Zama will go on to NHLONIPHO. If you are ready, then we'll take questions and comments.
Okay, thank you so much. Firstly, I would like to touch on the questions that you posed, where you were asking if it is relevant. Is this fees must fall topic only relevant during registration only, and if people are campaigning? So I'd like to go back a bit to say that post-apartheid in South Africa, education has been seen as a strategic tool to reverse 300 years of colonialism and apartheid. So once you have tasked education with such a responsibility to reverse about 350 years, as we are now, of structured economical and political oppression, it is no longer a budget line that you tick in a budget speech, right? So it becomes more of something that we have to make practical. So by this, I mean that this cost then has to address injustices of the past and going into the future. And therefore, it should be made a priority. It should no longer be about, is it affordable, is it sustainable, where's the money going to come from? Because we're trying to adjust to address legacies of the past and the future. So I'm going to touch also on, for example, I'll go into NSFAS. So the reason that the previous NSFAS funding model was not adequate, right? It was because of this. More in particular, Africans, and in general, the poor and the working class. When we go into university, we have a funding model of NSFAS, which people were supposed to pay back. After graduating at university, we have a debt of about 300 to 400,000 if you're an NSFAS student. And if we're saying that we're trying to fight the injustices, the socio-economic injustices, a student that has such an amount of debt, how are they expected to fight to also be equal, to also participate in the marketing industry? So by this, I will make an example, is that when you leave university, you don't have, you go back to home because you don't have an apartment that is readily waiting for you. You still have a loan. And by the way, now the universities have started a strategy of selling loans of students to banks. And that means that a student will not be able to buy a house until they've paid that loan. So I will quote, if a ladder of opportunity rises at the doors of some youth and scarce at the doors of others, while an education is made a formal prerequisite for any form of social and occupational advance, then that education becomes a means for reproducing racial and class inequality and not eradicating it. I close quote. So by this, speaks to what I already alluded to say that if the poor and the working class have NSFAS as a mean of a loan, it was not working because of these people, when they leave university, they have responsibilities. Okay, I will also speak to why is it relevant, or why is it mostly seen during the registration period? This is because of that. Even the current NSFAS system that we have, where NSFAS is a bursary, it is still not adequate. It is still not the free education that we want. By this, I mean that if you are using, and there's an N+2 rule, and if you are using NSFAS, you lose it, next year you're not funded, going into the other year, you will have registration issues. Where are you expected to take the money from? So what we mean when we say during registrations, we see a lot of students who have probably failed on a certain year, and then they did not have the NSFAS funding on that year, and they want to register. We see students who are rejected by NSFAS, not because they owe above, their family income is above 350,000, but because of the incompetences of NSFAS, where it rejects people who are deserving. We also have a group of missing middle students who are too rich to qualify for NSFAS and too poor to pay for their fees. So also have those students who have issues when it comes to registration at this time. So it is not form of campaigning, because if you would see during protests and everything, you would see that the opposition parties do most of the time work together. So I would like to agree with Bongani on the fact that resources must be channeled to causes that we need, that are in demand, that will make a better country. But however, the issue that we have, I think it's in the Department of Higher Education itself. By this, I mean that you will see last year, the minister said that he was announcing causes that are in demand. He said it's the digital economy, it's energy, data scientists, and electrical engineers, and in the finance industry, to name a few. And then he further alluded to say that some students take courses that do not result in them being employed. As Bongani has already said, that there's a certain stigma when it comes to TVETs, and TVETs do give practical experience. But because there's a certain stigma in TVETs colleges, students will then run to the university, and then they take whatever course that is available. And I think it's the Department of Higher Education that has to fix this. Fix this how? Fix this by trying to say, by taking away to some extent this thing that is called the institutional autonomy, because I think the most greatest enemy in the Department of Higher Education is the institutional autonomy, where the university decides, this is what we are going to do, this is what we are going to do, without the the Department of Education being able to control them or limits them. So what I'm saying is that the Department of Higher Education should regulate the courses that are available, that are given to students. Because if you go to Wits University, for example, the highest, the faculty that takes the highest number of people is the humanities faculty. Yes, we do need teachers, we do need journalists, but most of them, you'll find students who are doing archaeology, students who are doing things that we don't really, at this point in this digital world, have to, that are not required, that are not in demand in the labor market. So I then say that it must fall within the Department of Higher Education to take up that responsibility to influence universities that these are the courses that we need in the labor field, so that we do not just produce graduates who are going to go back, sit at home with their debts or debts of NSFAS or debts of the university. So yeah, I would like to end there for now.
Thank you so very much. That is quite profound. Zama, when you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's always difficult to speak at the end, but you reminded me that I worked at Equal Education. I spent a lot of years there, which is kind of a big movement that does work on research on education. And I think one of the biggest things, and I think I want to put in this conversation, is how education throughout, the past 15 to 20 years has been devalued. So the budget of the higher education and the budget of the basic education has been cut throughout systematically, over 10% every year. So the government spends lesser and lesser on education every year, even this year. So there's a kind of reasoning behind, the development of fees must fall. That generations before them, they could get more funding, they could get more access, but as we move along, less money is provided for that. I mean, we saw last year with the NEFSAS trying to cut out the nursing and the teaching funding. So a lot of that is happening in our education sector, that the government doesn't see a need to put money in this thing. So that's the first thing. I think we must agree on that. I mean, it's facts, it's research, the numbers are there, that the government spends less on public services, not just education. When you go to health or you go to housing, more and more money is taken away by the government. So the fights are, are expected to come. That's my first point. My second point is that our education must never be under the dictatorship of the market, or what the market needs now. Because the market is not some godly hand that works and is superior and is a god that we must follow, And then that's the problem in this country. I mean, you hear people in parliament talking about the fourth industrial revolution, but there's nothing really happening about the fourth industrial revolution in this country. There's a huge digital divide. We have a huge population in the townships and in the rural areas who are not even connected to the internet. If you talk fourth industrial revolution in this country, you're talking about a few percentage of people in the cities that are actually engaging in technological stuff. So I mean, it's easier to say for China, in Hong Kong, it's easier to talk about the fourth industrial revolution, because a very significant mass of people are in the internet, are doing artificial intelligence. I think so I think our education must be targeted at where are we as a country, and not what the global markets are saying we are. And then South Africa likes that. South Africa wants to be, because it's one of the biggest economies in Africa, so it must, follow the global economy. But we normally forget that we're in a third world country. We're not a US, we're not England, we're not even we're not even China, we're not even India in terms of global markets and the range of the economy. So what the government is basically saying is that devalue the thing. Devalue education, don't pay for this, don't pay for that. Yeah, I mean, the last report that we read from Standard Bank was to say that, you know, the labor market in South Africa can only accept over 40,000 that graduate a year. So you kind of have an economy that is not creating jobs, you know, and you're in a country where, you know, even doctors will say we're unemployed. While you go to other economies, they'll tell you, no, we're not producing enough doctors. So there's that problem. And I think we need to look at that rather than taking an easier route to say these degrees are useless, these degrees don't work, these degrees, because it doesn't work like that. Because if you do that, if your education is market driven, and the market tomorrow says medicine is useless, then the thing doesn't work. So education must be always done in a way for national development and not the market. And in South Africa, at a place where we don't have enough doctors in the hospitals, you can even go to Bahara, which is the biggest hospital, you see the lines. We don't have enough teachers. Our classrooms are overcrowded, even at varsity level. I mean, I used to in first year sit on the steps in my first year class. So there's those things that are there that I think we must think about it, and that we must actually question the government. Why is it devaluing? Why is it paying lesser and lesser throughout the years?
Wow, this is just a mouthful. But I'm asking myself as you guys are busy talking, and ladies and gentlemen, this is not a dialogue or an interview kind of a situation. All of us are allowed to raise our hands, and then we engage on this topic, because I saw people were unmuting and muting because they probably wanted to speak. As you prepare yourself to also participate in this discussion, I just have a question with regard to the faculties in universities that are overcrowded. Is it because we do not have good guidance at school, or is it because, as you were saying, people just want to have a university degree, even if it will not be adding value to them? And what is it that we can do to improve that? Is it universities that are putting small numbers on faculties that are perceived to be, now I'm raising this question this way because of what Zama was saying. Is it because universities are limiting people, or mostly Black people, let's just say, who will be able to get the scarce skills within those faculties? And yeah, maybe let me pause there. Is it because we don't have sufficient guidance at high school level, which leads to people going to varsity, some of them not knowing which degrees to take? Or is it because the universities has put a small numbers of students that they can you know, sort of admit in those faculties, and in the process they are left with only the side of humanities to go into? Let me start with Thabiso, and then Zama, then NHLONIPHO, in that order.
Thank you, Ma'am Tammy. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm actually quite taken aback at the intensity of this conversation. But I think that we also have to contextualize some of these issues from looking at the throughput that the Department of Basic Education is really supplying into the higher education space. Now, South Africa now stands the risk of becoming a factory for cheap labor because of that particular issue. The fact that we have the entire educational space being compromised right from the supply standpoint is a real crisis, and universities are only going to respond as businesses and not essentially as institutions that are looking for the, you know, to protect public interest. That's not how it works. It's essentially just economics, demand and supply. If I can frustrate the supply of a specific course, for me to be able to hike its fees, then I'm going to do that as a business. And that's what we must start to really engage capital as a very ruthless and cold machine that does not actually seek to fulfill the interests of, any form of disenfranchised grouping of people. And we're here now at the precipice of this particular, era where we have to actually start speaking to our government and holding them accountable for how they've, really just diminished their capacity to protect economic growth, even from that standpoint. I mean, we have the National Development Plan, and Zama alluded to it very, very beautifully when he spoke about the fact that we're responding to critical skills from a market shortage perspective and not from a national vision perspective, not from a nation building perspective. And that is always going to be our shortcoming. And we have to start really engaging with this country as nation builders and not necessarily as individual actors. And this is where we're finding ourselves. But on the notion of how we got here, I think that we have to actually look at it from the illicit affair that the ANC has always had with capital. The notion that we needed capital more than we actually thought we did is for me fundamentally flawed. Henceforth, we cannot respond to capital at any given point in time. We are held hostage by it at will, even from the basis of who actually gets what in this country. Do you actually get a private school education? To what extent are you actually getting that? Do you actually get, selection into the job markets? And what is the criteria besides your skin color? So these are the crises that we find ourselves in, where I was actually reading a tweet the other day, where New York Times was actually commenting on the fact that, millennials are so innovative that they've now started to actually club in together to actually buy properties. And the response, there was someone who responded there who said that you morons, we're not clubbing in, we're just too poor to actually afford housing. That's why we actually have to, go at it as a group where we save and we actually just, put forward money to actually buy property, so that's the only chance we'll ever have or hope of actually owning anything. And that's the reality that we live under. And I'm sure that most young people, most millennials here on this platform now are really concerned about that. The fact that we're put up against, certain societal standards to actually own certain things at a certain age, but we can't. It doesn't matter whether you've graduated or not. You can't actually attain those things because of that particular fundamental that we're held at ransom, and our social mobility is not determined by us anymore. And that is a particular crisis that has really been brought about by this whole discussion that we're having now.
Yes. And I think NHLONIPHO, as she was presenting, she did indicate that you finish your schooling or you graduate, there is no way you can be able to have an apartment where you're going to stay, because that is something that you have to work for. And on top of that, there's a loan that you still have to pay. Let me not elaborate further. Zama, you were next.
Yeah, no, thanks. I think it's always difficult to speak after Tabi, so he's a very good speaker. But I want to say, firstly, just to ground the discussion, that when we talk about varsity and people get to go varsity, we're talking about a small droplet in a huge sea, like a very small droplet. So for example, in South Africa, we normally have a kind of a pass rate that's also not like done well, around 50 to 60. But basically, people get the bachelor degree who are all, we can get an opportunity to go to varsity. So it's like 19%. And then if you calculate those who can make it after a 4-year or 3-year degree, that's like 4%. So you have a huge mass of young people in this country who don't make it through the education system, who just fall in the cracks. And I'm not even talking about, those who drop up in high school. Especially now due to COVID, we had huge numbers of young people because of the COVID and the schools closing and opening, who were just left. So if you get to varsity, you're just one of the few lucky people. Before we even try to think. So we're talking about a very small population of Black people. And even in that stat, the higher education department underfunds those small amount of young people. It does worse with the TVETs. So there's the issue of a deprioritization and a devaluing of our education system from basic education, whereby less and less is spent on an individual Black child. So when the results were coming out and Musi was on social media complaining about, wow, the private schools are so expensive. You know, for example, you pay 200,000 or more for a very good private school. Then you look at how much the government in the public sector, which is 80% of the children. So when people look at private school, that's 20%. That's like small population of rich people. So if you look at the 80% of people coming from the public system, where the government spends at least 110 Rand a year for a kid, 110 Rand. You must have good textbooks, you must do this, you must do that, which we know the state of our public schooling system. So already, even when you go to varsity, you are highly disadvantaged, you are highly uneducated. So when we, for example, got to Wits and all these places, we already, you know, felt excluded because there were these kids who already knew these things that we didn't know because we went to public schools. So there's a huge issue of the government devaluing education and continuing with that, and that universities, of course, as Thabiso said, and then they take a capitalist approach. As long we make money, as long we do this, but education as a national project is not taken seriously. Majority of young people who are unemployed, who are in the streets, who are filling our villages and our townships, have never even finished matric. So when we talk about those who actually luckily make it to Wits, we then say, okay, you luckily did that, but at the end of the day, the government still devalues the thing. And then more kids who are at varsity become those who can afford. And that, I think, the funding issue cannot be avoided because it's very important. It does affect what makes you be able to learn. If you don't have accommodation, you can't learn. You can afford food, you can learn. If you can't do this, you get to drop out. And that it becomes more and more a very difficult time. And I think what has happened in South Africa is that we always value these things. We always value struggling. So when Angie Mutseka announces the matric results, there's some kid from the Eastern Cape who studied through a candle, who struggled, who what, that we must celebrate. Same thing at varsity. We must have this guy who had no accommodation, who had no nothing, but was able to get a degree. But we're saying that, but that's not supposed to be the standard. The standard is that the state must be able to provide funding for people who qualify for university or TVET to be able to go through a transition of learning and learning in comfortable positions for them to perform at their maximum and be able to go into the labor market with sufficient skills that are not interrupted by the fact that they are poor. So we must start fighting against that ideology of struggle, that ideology that the kids who must make it are those who are committed and they make it through things. It must be about the government must provide sufficient funding and conditions to make our kids, Black kids, to go through public education and even university education. Thank you.
Thank you so much. In a nutshell, it shouldn't be about what the market wants. Let me take NXUMALO, your hand was up initially, and then Galaxy A30, you will come next. I don't know, I can't see your name. And then after that, Thabiso, you'll come back again. Bongani, we're not ruling you out. We would like to hear from you too. NHLONIPHO?
Thank you so much. I would respond to the question that you kind of posed, that are universities putting small numbers on the fields that are highly required? Okay, so first of all, I would like to agree with Thabo that universities, because they are some sort of a business, they will respond to what is highly in demand. And that is because of, I also agree with Ozama to say that our basic education system is also not producing people that would really qualify for the courses that would, maybe your actuarial sciences that are in demand, your computer sciences. However, I don't know if it's just my obsession, but I still feel like to some extent, some universities, there is some sense of racial and class segregation. By this, I mean, if you want to go into health sciences, for example, at Wits, and I think that's the case with UCT, I don't know which other universities. If you want to go into health sciences, medicine, you have to go through what? A test called NBT. NBT, it's something that I've been thinking about like this entire week, because I've been receiving a lot of people sending me their metric statement saying this, my child was rejected for medicine. And when you look at their marks, these students either get 6 out of 6 distinctions, some 7 distinctions. And when you go and look at their NBT, they either got 57 or something like that. First of all, the NBT tests what? Tests your English. As a child who's from Orlando, I know the basic English that I must write, that I must be able to interpret the instruction that I'm given. And when you go to the NBT, it's a different kind of English. It's a different kind of English. So I think by that on its own is just a mechanism to sort of exclude a certain portion of people from entering the system. Because really, these students will get 7 A's and still can't be able to enter into health sciences. How is that possible? I think it's just a thing of a class and racial exclusion. Because if obviously I am from a good school, I will pass that NBT, obviously. But as someone from the rurals, I will pass my metric to show that I am dedicated and I'm smart enough. I study hard, but because of the language barrier and all those things, I will not be able to make it into certain fields. Thank you.
My name is Mabori Mampa, and thank you so much for the invite, Tembekile. And one would really wish that the representative of higher education and training was attending this session, because critical issues are being discussed here, which really would assist the Department of Higher Education and Training. I want to address myself to what Bongani has indicated regarding the state of TVET colleges. You know, it has been bothering me always to say TVET colleges are less recognized in South Africa. They are underfunded, as he has indicated. They are neglected, they are underrated. And there are lots and lots of research papers that have been developed regarding the usefulness, the assistance that TVET colleges would assist the economy of South Africa. And it's worrying, because TVET colleges have been reduced into the last option for the students who are not being acceptable at the universities. It's like a, by the way, there are these institutions that one can go. And really, I'm not sure if the problem is marketing or the problem is leadership, which does not have passion for education. I really would suggest that we have a session to really discuss the role of the TVET colleges in South Africa, so that we also assist the Department of Higher Education, because seemingly they are not interested with TVET education, and hence most of the students, for them, the credibility and it's when they went to universities, not TVET colleges. Thank you so much, Temekile.
You know, as you're talking, I'm asking myself, why is it then that a lot of the young kids from the white people, or from the white people, would refer their kids to technical schools, TVET colleges, sometimes before they even go to university? We hosted some few people who have become pilots, and before then they were taken to TVET colleges, which we call TVET colleges now, just to get sort of a practical way of doing things before they go to even university. Is it because as Black people we were told it's only when you go to university that you'll be considered as elite, as, you know, professional and so forth? I just want you to think about that question as I allow the three hands that I have now to respond to raise their views too. Tabiso, you are first, and then Shadrach next, and then Amanda will follow.
Thank you, Mamtem. I think that sometimes in how we engage, and this is just maybe how I am, I don't like to beat about the bush. I think that we need to actually characterize issues the way that they are. The fact that you have, you know, entire neglect of the TVET institution as a result, as NHLONIPHO actually said, of that racial discrimination. Now, who owns capital? Capital is owned by the white people. Who owns the most prestigious institutions in this country that we all want entry into as Black people?
Mm.
Now, we have to actually take it back to some of our own blunders. One, why did we allow the elite Black institutions that actually historically existed to actually die out? Fort Hare is a mess wherever it is right now. And any other form of Black educational institution that existed, you know, pre-apartheid. Now, those are critical in actually addressing some of the issues that we're currently having. You sit in a country where you have an entire higher education space that's actually dominated by 4 or 5 top universities that have international linkages, because of the mere fact that, one, you have our leaders' kids actually going to these institutions. So they have all the more incentive to actually get involved as parents. It just only makes sense. If I'm a parent and my child is actually going to this institution and I'm paying money, I would want to actually make sure that I get the best return on that money that I possibly can through the international connections that this child might potentially have to go and actually explore their skills in other spaces. Now, that is the exact reason why we're sitting here and TVETs are, by the way, issue. That is the exact reason why we're sitting here now and vocational education is being dramatically ignored. Over the sense of the fact that it can actually make you more employable from just how you can participate in the market, as we actually have put it. Now, we're sitting and we're not really trying to actually capture these issues because we think that there's some higher level hypothetical reason why we're sitting here. No, the ANC government has failed to really just deliver on those promises. And that is the particular problem. The fact that you have a corrupt government right now that has made education so unfashionable. We sit in a country where after you've actually acquired yourself an education or qualification, you have your siblings who look at you, struggle to acquire a job because you now cannot actually fulfill the promises of changing your family's social mobility. And that on its own has a psychological effect on how education is now seen. And those are the things that we're fighting here. Those are the things that we actually have to speak about. I mean, the last time we were having our discussion, Mamtemi, Lerato Gambo was actually on here, and he's actually sitting as the chair of a TVET council out in the Northwest. I mean, he went through that education system, and he's actually quite brilliant. But that story is not being shared enough. The leadership and the support that he's getting and the context that he's getting in those spaces is really making his job really difficult. And that just speaks to how Black institutions are governed versus white institutions are governed. That would also tie back into the point that NHLONIPHO made when she spoke about, you know, institutional autonomy. I'm a private institution, basically. I pay my own bills. I just get to actually charge the invoice that I want to charge to whoever's willing to pay me. And we have to take it back to those dynamics. If we're going to miss those dynamics, we're going to sit here 15 years later and really have to grapple with how your child wanting to go to Wits is going to cost 1.5 million in terms of tuition. There's no control. There's no control because there's no alternative. And the more we actually just emerge with Black-owned alternatives, really staunch and entrenched in really driving the quality aspect, really going out and meeting up with other Black institutions in the States, other Black institutions in Europe, and trying to actually make those linkages, then we're forever going to be singing the song. Thank you.
Zamai is indicating here that the TVET colleges are actually dysfunctional. The target for intake is actually 1 million, but every year usually there will be like 700,000 people registering, and people are registering, like I was indicating, as a stepping stone to be able to go to varsity. Everything is pointing back to Department of Higher Education, unfortunately. Shadrach.
Yeah, thank you very much. You see, what I want to do is to reflect on what Zama said, that the economy is not, I will try to quote him. He's saying the economy is not growing fast enough so that it can create the employment for most of our graduates. And the courses that the university are offering are market driven. You see, for me, that goes to the heart of our problem as a country, because when we say the economy is not growing fast enough to create employment, because the emphasis has always been on creating graduates that will ultimately be employed, as opposed to training students who will be able to be employers in future. And in as much as we might want to say the universities are market driven, that is the reality of the matter. The reality of the matter is we've got a lot of graduates sitting at home. Some have been unemployed for the past 20 years, simply because they have got the qualifications that the market doesn't need. And the reality is, if you go to varsity, you study towards something, and the intention is not to be employed. I mean, the intention is to be employed by one company or government department somewhere. Obviously, you are forced one way or the other to try to acquire a qualification that is in demand in the market. That's the reality of the situation. The proof of that is our brothers and sisters who acquired qualification either in administration, in a social work, mostly in humanities, who to date for the past 15 years, they've said as it is, have not been employed. Somebody raised the question of NBT to say simply because most of the students that are sitting for these exams are not making it, this and that. I'm not convinced personally that it can be a racial thing, because the question that has to be answered is it the law of general application? Is each and every applicant who aspire to be a doctor required to sit through that particular exam? Because if we are to speak of prejudice, I think we should go way back, because if if our students have to write grade 12, I can validly make the same argument that simply because of our background, we are at a position of disadvantage. Because grade 12, you are required to write in English, which is not our mother tongue. Because you see, when we were at varsities long time ago, this is not a new debate as to whether we have got about 4 prestigious institutions in the country. And I can say there was a neglect. When I went to what we refer to as historically Black institution, University of the North, and the students were proud to say, I don't have to go to VES to compete in the market. This is the best university. And even to date, I've been to various other historically white institutions. And if you ask me, in what university did I study, I'll tell you straight, University of the North. Because I've never believed that the quality of a graduate is determined by the institution in which one attended. We've got good historically Black institutions that produced fine jurists in this country, that produced fine doctors in this country. So for me, the quality of a graduate is not determined by whether you mingled more with whites or it's not. As Black people, we need to get to a point where we really internalize this thing, Yoguti, Black is equally capable. I can talk a lot on this issue, but maybe, Chair, in the interest of time, I can raise it there. Thanks a lot. I can stop it.
You are really making this quite interesting because as you were talking, I'm asking myself then, Bongani, no, was it Bongani? Yeah. Bongani said, better fewer but better, meaning you take a small group, you educate them with the resources that you have, and then you are able to probably make them make it to the market, which Zama said the labor market can only absorb 4,000. You are coming and you are saying the universities that we currently are considering as actually top 4 are not necessarily the best. It's just that based on them having been considered, the best or have been ranked worldwide, I guess, makes people want to go there because they know going there will make them be eligible for the market. Because usually UCT, for instance, I know of my nephews, UCT would, for instance, organize companies to come and make sure that their people or their students get to be exposed to those kind of opportunities. But you are saying we also need to consider these other universities. Zama said the funding is not enough for those people who want to go to the very same lower universities that we are talking about, because there's no money on the table and the government is not willing to make sure that these people are getting funding for them to be able to go to the very same, not so highly classed universities. They can't be able to afford food. They won't be able to afford accommodation. Some of them will fail, like NHLONIPHO was saying. Some of them will fail, and they will be excluded. For instance, NSFAS will no longer pay, but still we want them to be educated. We shouldn't overlook the fact that as much as we want to go to these universities, there's still the issue of funding that is on the table. That is actually the reason why we're having this conversation. Amanda?
Looking at the topic for discussion today, and the issues of the fees must fall and what happened beginning of the year in terms of these, in terms of academic, higher education, whatever. My contribution to this discussion is that for me, first and foremost is the role of parents in education of their children. We tend to want to want externals like your government, your university, to do this, to do that. But what is the role of parents in the education of their kids? If I can take you back, in the olden days, the parents who were gardeners, who were domestic workers, they were involved in the education of their kids in a way that says that I'm the helper. I don't want my child to be a helper. I'm going to take any penny and everything to take this child to a nursing college, to be a police, to be a teacher. Then we had teachers. The teachers said the same thing, that I don't want this child to be a teacher or a nurse and so on. I'm going to take them to be a doctor, medicine, a lawyer, and blah, blah, blah. That's how the different generations have been looking at. Now, the question that we must ask ourselves is that these generations, these new generations, whether you call them the X, the baby boomers and so on, how have they been, or the XY, whatever generation, how they are so involved in the education of their kids? Because right now we are working in different spaces right now, and we have the worldview of what works and what doesn't work. Why now, when I'm sitting here, I'm going to force my child to go to a university that I know I've already seen even my younger sisters are not getting jobs with this university degree that I want? Why are we not changing the mindset? Because that child, your child, you have an influence in your child because you have the broader understanding of the world and what is working and what is not working. So I don't want us to put the parents aside as if they don't have, in fact, they are the ones that have a bigger role to play before the university can come in, your NEFSAs can come in, the students can strike and complaining about the courses that are being offered in the university. The second thing that I want to raise here, there is a challenge of parents that don't understand the vision of the universities that they are taking their kids to. For an example, I sat in a assessment a process of University of Pretoria, UP, because I'm in the SABPP, because I'm an HR person. We had to go and assess the curriculum of HRM at UP. I will not lie to you, as a panel, we were so shocked. I didn't know, the others didn't know, even those that are whites, by the way, that the vision of UP is to be a leading research intensive university in Africa, recognized internationally for that matter. Therefore, what they do, they are not teaching the practitioners. They are not teaching the students to be practitioners and go and open their companies or work. They are teaching the students to be researchers. Guess what? When the students, most of the students, when they graduate them, they do the honors, they channel them to honors, channel them to masters, channel them to PhD, channel them to be the little lecturers. Because what theirs is knowledge, knowledge-driven, knowledge production. These kids become producing their research, the articles, and so on. And remember, that university is making lots of money through those articles that goes to journal. And that's their vision. But if you are a parent that doesn't know what is the vision of the university, of the academic institution that you are taking your child, then that is also your problem as a parent. I learned from that little assessment that we set there to say that if I want my child to be an accountant and whatever, let me not take my child to UP. Let me take an institution that will help my child to be able to develop his accounting firm or to be employed in the accounting field. But if I want my child to be a professor that writes articles in big journals and so on, UP is the best because their vision is to be leading in research intensive. So it's very important for the parents also not to be away from these debates of academic institutions or debates of fees must fall, debates of because it starts with the parents. Last comment that I want to make, I'm using an example, me as a personal example. Myself and the father of my children, we studied. And I can tell you now that we studied at UCT, both of us. Of course, other qualifications after my degree, I got them in different institutions because I needed to diversify where I get my qualification. But guess what? Our first son rejected higher education. He did his matric and he was clear that he wants to be out there and work for himself. And he has now went and looked for a job for himself in the property industry. And what we had to do, of course, it was not easy for us because we are also what is this word? We are also enslaved by this thing that a child must go to university and have a degree and so we were enslaved with that. So it was not a nice discussion and decision in the family. But guess what? We had to say that, you know what? This child has to live his life. He cannot be living our life. This child is going to live his life. So he must choose what career that he wants to follow. But what we need to do, as soon as he gets his passion, the passion that he has, the career that he has passion on, we will support him in that career. And that's what we are doing. We are supporting in that career of being in the property industry and everything because they have short courses there and so on. And guess what? When you got there, so many young whites, my dear, so many young whites, they are all agencies, so many young girls. So it's all about also us as parents. We need to take charge of the education and the future of our children. So that's the contribution that I want to make. Besides the fact that, yes, the government should provide assistance from those who can't afford to have these opportunities, yes. But we must also remember the government enables the private sector and anyone who wants to open business. The government enables. Government doesn't really create employment. It's the private sector and the individual people that open business. I heard the other guy who's a training, whatever, who's having his company. It's people like those that are creating the jobs for the people. All the government must do is make sure that the service provider of training has all the support in terms of the legislation, gets all the funding if there's grants and so on, so that he can do this business and employ. So we must also bear in mind that government doesn't employ, but creates a conducive environment for anyone who wants to open business, for anyone who wants to do anything that talks to business, creating employment for people. So we must also look at that. But I do want to say that parents are just taking their responsibility, giving their responsibility to externals, and it will not work. Thank you.
Let me go back to my panel. Bongani, you have been listening to all the people that have been talking and the input and the views. What is your take with regard to, because you indicated that as much as we would want to have, people getting educated and so forth, and now taking into consideration the point by Amanda that we are actually, as parents, making our kids to go the route that probably may not necessarily assist them in becoming what they want to be in terms of education, getting these university degrees with the hope that they will get employed, because that's what we're probably made to believe. So what is your view with regard to everything that has been said? And the fees must fall being probably the solution to helping those who may not be able to afford and wanting to have those degrees to go to university. Yeah, I believe you have listened quite a lot. Then I'll take Zam after that.
No, thanks for the question. I think to properly contextualize this glorification of academic education, which is university education, we need to understand its history. And I believe that's something we've not engaged in significant or at all in the conversation. So just to give a brief history of this thing, it starts in the US when slavery is abolished, when Black people are now given access or freedom to enter into academic spaces and not just used as laborers or as part of the labor force, but to actually get into education, to empower themselves, and. So now people are asked, do you want academic education or do you want native education? It is suggested that first get native education in order to build your communities, because that's where the actual practical skills are. Like that's where you learn how to build a road, how to build a house, how to build this and that, the actual built environment, the building factories and so forth and so on. So that is not an academic exercise, that is a native exercise. But because now, in terms of development, whites were already advanced and they were already in universities, already generating this theoretical education that we now call academic education. We felt that, or people then felt that that is what they should aspire for. And then they chose this academic education and forgone this native education, knowing very well that in terms of development, that they were behind and they needed to start there. So now that's where then the problem begins. Then years later, it comes into Africa as African states are now getting liberated and so forth and so on. Then the leaders then, the formerly oppressed then, they also now gravitate towards academic education and they pump in a lot of resources there and less or no resources towards native education. And then later on in life, the very same people with the very same mentality become ministers of higher education and so forth and so on. And they continue in that line of thinking that they still see academic education as more glamorous. So those people now are decision makers in your parliaments and everywhere. They still then channel a lot of resources towards academic education. As you would have seen, for instance, let's look at the past maybe 3 or so ministers of higher education in South Africa. They all hold PhDs from universities. They're not products of TVET. Therefore, naturally, they would gravitate towards that. They all come from an era of apartheid where Black people were denied access to these institutions, and they still believe that these institutions are the institutions. So that's why when you go back into South Africa, those community or whatnot colleges were abolished. And they were abolished by, I think, under the era of Thabo Mbeki, who also studied from a university in west of in England. So they have that mentality now. So they do not see these ones, these institutions as contributing something, but there's some pressure from society in order to maintain or retain them. So now they abolished those community colleges. You had your teacher colleges. If you would remember, you did not need to get a matric to become an educator or to get to be trained as a teacher in South Africa. Those things came later, and now you have to go to university in order to get a BA, the Bachelor of Education. Whereas you could do it back then without having to go through those processes, because that was demand management to universities. So universities focus on what they are good at. And I like what Uzama said, that they're research-intensive universities. Most universities in South Africa or your historically white institutions are research-intensive. If they are not, that's what they aspire to be, and that's what they get actually ranked on. When they say university is #1 ranking, it's mainly because of their research output and not anything else. So now it's your historically Black institutions that focus more on undergraduates. Hence, so they have this huge pool of undergraduates and the problems that come. But then also now, if you go back to South Africa before democracy, there was also now the creation of technical schools, and those technical schools were properly resourced. So that means a child or a young person would come out of high school properly trained, properly skilled, and they would not need to articulate to a college, they would not need to articulate to a university, because they already had skill and they can use that skill in order to generate income for themselves or in order to enter the labor market without all these things. So now all these things are done away with. Now there's this fixation of academic education, and the fixation comes with the prioritization of resources. That's why now you find that if you compare TVET and a university, a university gets more resources. If you compare an academic university or a comprehensive university with a technical university, what we call a technical, the academic university gets more resources over this one. So now we have not even now filtered in the race profiling and so forth and so on. So now that was what becomes the problem. And now here I am as a domestic worker or so forth and so on. And I also now have this thing my child must go to university, my child must go, the child himself or the child herself also wants the same thing from this Black community. Hence, we also look down on this thing. So this thing is historical and we are just looking at it from what we see now, but it's older than us, it's bigger than us, but it's not something that can then be reversed. Now, when we come also to the second part of the question of fees must fall. Fees must fall, I do not want to get into the ideological side of it, where is to say, also you must tear down all this Africanization and so forth of education and so forth. Let's look at just the economic side to say, remove the economic barriers so there's easy access to these institutions, because now in a democratic South Africa where you cannot close people out due to their race, you close people out due to their economic standing. So now you heighten fees, you make things more expensive. By so doing, then a certain group in society cannot access certain things. And if you look at that certain group that cannot access, you'll find that it's generally or mainly Blacks. So now we're saying take those things down, but then we did not push the conversation further to say what must our people study in those spaces, which is what I said earlier. To say now, we are saying, no, make it free. So now it's free, you study whatever, university says, okay, fine. And we know that in Black, and I like the point that we have also neglected basic education. So maths and sciences have declined in our schools. Less people are taking them up, and the very few that take them up pass them well enough in order to articulate to universities. And that's why sometimes you also see less representation of Black people in the so-called your science faculties or faculties that require mathematics, faculties that require sciences in order to end. And hence you see a huge representation of them in your humanities, because by and large, humanities does not require that. Humanities will take you with your maths literacy, will take you with certain subjects and so forth. So that's also systematic, and it does not come because a university now wants to also, as much as they do it, that predatory style of leadership that I said earlier. But certain things come as a result of a response to such things, that there's a decline in certain things. And therefore, you cannot have big classes of this and small classes of that, or they come natural. So now you have to then understand how these things also then happen. And you find that in your so-called white primary schools, white high schools and so forth, where these people have money and the people, they're actually doing their jobs. The teachers are sometimes actually doing their jobs. And then you'll find that they perform better in terms of maths and sciences, go to universities and become material science, and there's underrepresentation of Black people in those spaces as well. So now that's another thing that happens. But this must fall is to say, tear down this financial barrier, make it more accessible. But then we're not, as I said, broadening the conversation to say, we want our people to study certain things because these people must come and build the Black community, Black apparatus. So when we want to divert the conversation as just responding to market forces and make it as if that is wrong, there's nothing wrong. That's why I said that even in my opening remark, that when these countries, the Soviet Union that we are seeing today, the Russia that we are seeing today, that even if sanctions are imposed on that country, they do not have significant harm in the economy of that country. It's because they build state apparatus by channeling their resources towards certain things. Let me give a very practical example. When you build that state apparatus with the little resources that you have, people go there and they build the country. When they build the country, more resources come in. And when more resources come in, then you can find someone to go and do a PhD in sports sciences. You'll forgive me if anyone is studying that. Sorry. So that's when you have now the resources to channel to such things, That's why I gave even an example of South Korea. You must look at how South Korea developed. South Korea would not even find a person to go and study something like social work, for instance, which is important, psychology, for instance. It was either you go into maths and sciences, you get into electronics, knowing that you become employed by Samsung or LG. And then as the country grew, Then they had resources. Then they started funding other things because you are now generating the necessary resources to do so. But we have limited resources and there is underfunding. And that underfunding is because our government, by and large, spends a lot of its resources on widening the social safety net, which has no yields in terms of generating resources to grow the country. So that is not investment spending, that's more consumption spending without returns because of the ideological position that they may hold. But if you are serious, you fund it there knowing that there'll be returns. And once they are returns, you can then say, you take, because now we have plenty. So you need to start from somewhere. So to say, no, it's market driven, it's whatnot, and you fund people to study whatever, to study theology and all those things and so forth. We can argue whether it's important or not later, but you put in a lot of money, 300,000, a person goes and study that person comes out of university, they don't plow anything back. In terms of finances, they might plow socially, but economically, there are no plows into society. And now you are not generating enough resources. Now you are also hit here by structural unemployment, where you have people that are skilled in your theology and so forth, but there's no market for them. Structural unemployment, meaning the skills we have and what is required by the economy, there's a mismatch. The economy does not grow. It becomes stifled and frustrated over time. The few people that are working in the economy must now be taxed more in order to generate more resources. Now they don't have money to spend, it's just a mess. You have cyclical now unemployment as well, that the economy is going down because I like the point, and we must not run away from this point, that we have a government that cannot plan, that does not know what it's doing. So that's leading now to cyclical unemployment, where it's contributing to the increasing, or as a contributor, one of the contributors to the increase in graduate unemployment, even though people have the so-called scarce skills. I think someone said it earlier, that even doctors, people who studied medicine are now struggling to enter the labor market, but there's a serious demand for that skill. So you can, and the same person who made the point, you'll forgive me, was talking about market forces, but also that is a market force. The market requires doctors now, and we need to produce them. You have teachers that are sitting at home, whereas you have classes in South Africa of one teacher that is teaching about 45 learners. That means that's 45 scripts to mark, 45 assignments to mark. They are overworked because they have to do the administration of teaching and the actual teaching and learning. So now those are problems that we have. But now, whereas the cyclical unemployment and so forth. So we have to look at these things holistically, but we also have to understand where these problems emanate from and start solving problems. And to solve problems, we have to take unpopular decisions. To say, as government, as NSFAS, that 30 billion that is spent each year, we are going to stop funding certain courses because they are not contributing towards the direction the country is taking. But we still have, as I said, the National Skills Development Plan. You don't need to go to university, go get a skill there and do something else, because we have progressive policies in this country, just that those progressive policies are not progressively enforced. And that is why we are seeing a collapse that we are seeing. And even ministers saying it's colonization, it's black judges, it's this and that, but they're not doing their jobs. So that's the problem we have. The leadership deficit that we have is contributing to these things that we are engaging on today. And we need to touch on those things in order to move forward. Thanks.
Wow. I really love the passion, Zama.
Here, Bongani covered a lot. And I mean, vastly he agrees with me. And I think maybe, Kira, you must also guide me, and I don't want to speak longer. Yeah. I mean, and mostly, I mean, he referred to what I said. We agree generally. I wanted to firstly address the parents issue. Then I can speak a bit on what Bongani has addressed. Definitely agree that parents must get more involved and parents must know what's happening. But I want us to also look at the context. Where are we? And most of the time, I usually tell people that people might say that we're in a democracy. It's been almost 30 years of democracy, but we're still in a very much transition. There's a lot that has stayed the same, and there's a few that has changed. My mother when I went to university or when I went to UP to write my NPT or what, she didn't know this thing. She comes from Bantu education and they were forced to do an undervalued education. And, even if she worked hard, but my parents' contribution, even my father, to me getting a better education was to, let's give him better money. Let's give him an opportunity to go to a better school. But a lot of parents are still struggling within the transition, especially our parents which have a Bantu education history, which I think we must understand. That education was very devaluing. That education was very demeaning. That education was very putting down Black people. So there is a class of Black people who were devalued, who were, put down because of Bantu. I mean, if you can look at the curriculum of Bantu education, you can see that they were really teaching people for cheap Black labor. They were never teaching people to think or to know what to do or to know this. And I mean, there's Black parents who were able to overcome that and become better parents. But I think we must be, let's be less judgy, because I think especially our parents in this age have really gone through a very horrific process. Our parents were there in '76 fighting Afrikaans and all these other things. And I don't expect my parents to understand that Wits or UP or UCT is an intensive, research institution. I don't even, I mean, I think the only thing that my mother did was to, take me to res. And what I studied, how my classes were, it was very difficult, which, she used to be a person who bakes cakes for primary school children. Okay, so there's that point that we're still in a transition and we're still trying to figure out a lot of things. That's the one. To come to Bongani, I think, you see the problem if we let the market control what we do. Then we must also talk about the fact who owns the market. Who owns the economy of South Africa? Who owns the thing? And I mean, we don't need to debate and look. We just go to the JSE. Look at the companies listed. Who owns them? What do they do? Who owns the politicians will say what is this thing? The commanding heights of the economy. So there's a lot of that is still very owned by the apartheid forces. So when Hani says, I don't forgive de Klerk, not because of a person or what he is, but I don't forgive him because he did nothing in changing the apartheid forces that still exist today. So there's a lot of apartheid forces that still exist today. And they own the economy very vastly. And all economic matrices can point out to the fact that there's a white minority that runs this country. So when the ANC can't pay salaries, and that's your ruling class and party, and then they come to you and say, no, but our party is 70% funded by private capital. It means that we have to then follow what private capital says it must do. So if private capital says humanities is useless, psychology is useless, while our people are getting mad in the streets, and while our people need healthcare in the streets, and they say they are cutting the nursing degree, while our children in the schools that you mentioned are being taught in classrooms 40, 45, and NEFSA says we're cutting the education thingy for those who want to study education, we're cutting the high feeling budget. So we must say that, fine, structural employment and those who cause employment might be in the private sector, but the private sector also contributes to what causes structural unemployment in this country. And that people don't look at that. No one wants to question private sector. Private sector is this nice guy who's making money and has everything. And no one must question the market and no one must question the thing. And we're saying to you, but that thing must be questioned. And when you make examples of China and Cuba and all, those are people who question the market economy, the global market economy, that said, no, man, we can do these things as government. So they have different governments to us. So you can't compare China and South Africa or other things because they have socialist, communist, whatever governments that they choose to be. They don't have our government, which is kind of capitalist, doesn't own the economy. How do you run a country where you don't own the economy? That's the problem we have. How do you run a country? And I mean, that's why one of the reasons I wouldn't want to be president of this country, because whatever I do, I can't do much because the economy is in white minority hands. They own the best land in this country. They own the best economic stocks in this country. They own the best schools in this country, health facilities in this country. So all the stats can point us to the fact that so much of apartheid has remained the same, even after 28 years of democracy. And you are saying that the state doesn't have administrative capacity. So most of the time when you look at, watch TV, what is that thing that goes to and shows bad things on ETV? The thing doesn't work in the Eastern Cape, the thing doesn't work in the... So, and every time the state people will come up, they're like, no, we don't have a budget. We don't have a this, we don't have a this, we can't run the hospital, we can't run the school, the pit latrines, we can't put toilets. Because the state itself has no capacity to do anything. So for a state to be legitimate, it must be able to deliver services. So if it can't deliver services on the fact that it really doesn't own any commanding heights of the economy, I mean, the ANC can't even pay its rent, and you're expecting them to run a country. That thing can't work. That thing can't work. So just in closing is to say that political power is not enough. And I mean, when people like the EFF say we want economic power, they're challenging this kind of freedom that we're sitting with, that it's not enough. You can't sit in parliament and think you can transform people's lives. And we must talk about why unemployment has gotten worse in the post-apartheid setting. We must say why things have gotten worse. And I mean, we sit in a taxi and then our mothers tell us it was better in apartheid because at least the apartheid government built us houses. Now we stay in shacks. So we must address those things. To say, why has things gotten worse? Poverty has gotten worse since '94. Unemployment has gotten worse, unmatched. So people generally have been getting worse in terms of livelihoods. I mean, and this is not saying that let's go to apartheid, but this is to say that we must address the fact that the policies that were taken in by the ANC to leave the economy to white minority hands, the best land. I'm in Cape Town now. If you go to Cape Town anyway, with Bishop Courts, white people don't own just money. They own mountains and giraffes and our animals and what. They own this shit. You can't do anything. So that's the problem. So you can't run a government if you don't run the economy. The reason China works is because the government runs the economy. So you can't make an example of China. It's not the same. Yeah. You can't make an example of Cuba.
One of those,
yes. So you can't make examples of countries where their governments run economies, because then they are able to use their economies to empower, to transform the people's lives. In South Africa, our government doesn't own anything. So it can't really do a transformation project. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I want to, before you, Tabiso, I recognize you, but there are two people. I don't know if Tapiwa is still here. She's the She's the interim Secretary General of the SADC region youth arm. I invited her and I saw her, but I can't see her now. But there's also somebody who's based in Zambia, originally from South Africa, who preached the gospel of government that shouldn't be responsible for driving the economy. Mr. Mabobo, I would appreciate if you can give an input, and if WI is still around, I'll also appreciate if you guys can give an input and comments before Tabis.
Good afternoon, Tembe. I didn't want to comment because the topic today was talking about the fees must fall, and it's nice to hear from young people, and the points they are raising are spot on, and it resonates with that which I've been saying all this time as Southern African Business Development Forum. I think what is important is also to note, Tembe, that South Africa is a unique country. The history of South Africa is something that we tend to ignore. When we go back to 1994, we were living in homelands, and we just demolished the homelands, but we further recategorized them in provinces. So nothing much changed. So what happens in that is we did not integrate. We simply got excited to govern, and in governing, we inherited, we say we are liberated, but if you are not economically liberated, where you are able to dictate your terms of development, that this is what I want and this is how I want it done, you still have others dictating for you. It is a challenge. And the second part, which I also want to highlight, more especially on our young participants, it's, for me, I look at education as something that must liberate you mentally, that must open your horizon. And if we are still saying, I qualify and then I need to get a job, then we need to also look at what has education done for me? Has it opened the boundaries? Has it integrated me with the rest of the world? Because when you go to varsity, there is part of research that you do, you network, you do that. It opens and broadens the horizon. It's employment only within the boundaries of South Africa. Because I've been fortunate to be here in Zambia, and I see quite a lot of Zambians that have ventured out into the neighboring countries to further find opportunities but contribute back. So I'm saying what we need to also do as part of the challenge in solving the problem is, let us try as young people to align with what is the agenda of the continent. There is now the continental free trade. Trade is about trade, it's selling, it's trading. What are we doing to follow that which the continental free trade is bringing to the table? What is the agenda of the Agenda 2063? What is the African Union seeking to achieve? What is it that we are doing to explore that avenue? And what is it that we will require government to assist us in making an enabling environment in that regard? I'll give an example. When I was mentoring at NYDA, I used to say, can we club young graduates that are accountants? I went to University of Pretoria and requested that. That can help in management accounts for these small businesses that are getting tenders and do their management account. Get unemployed law graduates that can deal with the contracts and putting together of agreements. So in so doing, because in a business, you have your expenses that go to accounting and law, you pay your colleagues. So in so doing, you are empowering each other and taking the economy into your own hands. You have 114, if not mistaken, embassies in Pretoria in South Africa. And those are economic diplomacy. Have we approached them to say, what is it that we can trade with you? How many young people do we have that we can collaborate with them? So in trying to do that, we try and shift a little bit in saying, I have graduated, I'm unemployed. Because if we are to look at what apartheid did, it will take years to reverse that. And it might not be this generation that is bridging, but we also need to throw in a little bit of trying to transition and come up with solutions that will assist us. Once we're addressing the problem and making sure that we reverse the policies, because it's a fact, presently South Africa has one of the most confused political systems. We run elections every 2.5 years. And you can't have stable leadership that has to always focus on campaigning. Presently, the ruling party is facing the elective conference. And there is nothing that you can discuss with the ruling party now because it's about, will I survive come conference? So we look at that political power and we overlook the economic power. And the economic power can only be addressed when we, as the citizens, take this responsibility and work amongst ourselves to empower ourselves to network and build and use the laws that are there to make this work. And I think the other thing in conclusion is we also need to look at the relevance. Maybe let me not go there. It's a bit sensitive. Let me park it here. Thank you.
Thank you. NHLONIPHO, you were cut off and you're back. We'll take you and then Thabiso, because at the time I was giving opportunities to the panel members.
I would say that I must agree with Bongani to say that I got, I think it was Thabiso or Sama's argument to say that we must not just focus on the labor market. However, I would like to agree with Bongani to say that the reason we are stressing that more qualifications should be yield at the job market is because a large number of our people in South Africa are living in poverty. So in order for us to address those socio-economic injustices, we then need to make sure that we use our education system as a tool to address those legacies. And also, when we speak of free education, is that you must not sell it. For example, if you are saying that we are fighting for economic emancipation, but then you say to these people, but there's a man there selling guns and weapons to fight for this to fight for this economic emancipation. It's politically retarded. It doesn't make sense. So that is why we're saying that economic barriers should be removed from the doors of higher learning, not necessarily only higher education, but doors of learning in general.
Okay. Thabiso, maybe before you say what you want to say, you said something, don't switch off your mic. You said something during your input that there are young people who are coming together and buying properties together. And my question now is not only to you, but I think this will be one of the last questions that I would also want you to also speak to. Why is it that Black people that have acquired all those qualifications, which Zama is saying, they are not necessarily irrelevant? Why can't they come together and sort of start a school? Because that probably can be funded by, they can get a grant maybe from the government, or they can be able to source funding from whatever institution that they can apply from. Why is it that we just get educated and we sit and agree? I agree to a certain extent that indeed these qualifications, they will be required at some point. Maybe they are even required now to reduce the number of classes that are there in government, but because people get educated to just look for jobs, that is not happening. what is it that we should do to make sure that we change that mindset and that young people, not even young people, everybody who's got qualifications and they're not employed, to look at finding a way of working together in order to, to create employment for others.
Mamtembi, let me just first direct my first comment to Tata Mabobo. I was hoping that you would really hit us with something heavy there. Whatever you're holding back there or Nick, I was really waiting for it, but I can see that you've decided to be amicable and peaceful. But just to address the whole question, Mamtembi, that is the issue that actually emerges with scarcity, and we must actually start seeing it for what it is. Scarcity can actually be dehumanizing. Scarcity can really just, I think, bring out the worst in some of the best of us, where the contest for resources, the contest for opportunities, the contest for validation, and the contest for proximity is exactly what would actually then pit Black graduates up against each other. The whole notion that I got a job and we were in the same class and you didn't is one that can sometimes leave a bitter taste in someone's mouth, because of just how our system works, whereby a foregone, idea of why don't we club together and actually start an institution that will get funding, but we're not really accounting for the fact that there are resources that have to actually go into that institution being started. Those resources have to actually be contested via proximity capital that you would actually observe through relationships that some people have with high-ranking, powerful people that some people else don't have. And those are the particular characteristics that define South Africa today. Tata Mabobo spoke about the AFTCA, for instance. Look, I'm a tech evangelist because I'm a tech entrepreneur in this country. And I've really seen the power and the actual potential that technology could potentially have to solve some of these problems for us very quickly. Tata Mabobo, Tata Mfene from the FTCA has decided to actually hire over 200, I think, trade negotiators, obviously to align trade policy, currency valuations, all of those things, across the borders. I think it was a fundamental mistake. I think it's a waste of time. It's going to take us even longer to actually initiate any form of free trade in the continent, because you have blockchain technology now that can potentially not only fast track the eventuality of free trade on the continent, but actually make it almost nearby decentralized for us to actually operate. And what that would mean is that it would mean that no government would actually have the ability to stop anybody from doing anything through any form of regulatory framework. Now, those are things that I really touch on when I actually think about the future of this country. How do we actually decentralize concentration in the markets, concentration in ownership, concentration in every space that juxtapositions Black social mobility? And we have to start looking at these immediate alternatives as a way to do it. For instance, we're here speaking about, fees must fall and this prospect of free education. Finally, we're at a point where COVID-19 has brought about the potential, or has really brought in the eventuality of the potential of online education as a potential catalyst to actually deliver on the promises that, these exclusionary institutions have really been juxtapositioning us on. Now, why are we not, as especially a Black community, really delving into that particular avenue to say that how do we expand and optimize on online education as a way to decentralize these particular concentrations in that space? It's a no-brainer. If we can actually get, and the skill thresholds to really make it happen is not really that high. There are unemployed graduates who are computer science graduates, programming graduates that we can really pull in and say, let's start community-based education platforms where we can start creating content, so that teachers who are currently unemployed now and can't actually go back into the and plow their trade in the education system will suddenly have now an opportunity on the market, where instead of actually going and teaching in a conventional school, they can be responsible for creating the content that actually feeds into an online community. Yes, there are still major disparities in terms of access to data and access to internet in this country. However, I think that over time, specifically with regards to where we're going and where the current world is going, I think over time, if we do allow again for the decentralization conversation to happen, you can start to have much more smaller independent players
who are, for instance, contesting the spectrum space or have a stake in it, who can start providing, you know, data and internet connectivity on a localized basis. But we're not doing that because the truth of the matter is that South Africa is in an illicit affair with white capital. That's why spectrum today is being auctioned, or the best level of spectrum is being auctioned to the major companies. Henceforth, I say that I don't like to beat about the bush with issues. I just like to call a spade a spade. And this is what it is. We're sitting here and we're going around in circles, whereas the major issue that we're facing here is that for as long as we don't control the opportunities, for as long as we don't control the capital, for as long as we don't actually control the spaces that we move in, we are no better off than our parents were in the apartheid regime. We're not. Because at the end of the day, here we are sitting as young people, completely aggravated out our stagnancy because we were fed a lie. Go to school, get a qualification, that will equate to success, but it doesn't equate to that. What the true meaning of this is that, and this is the true equation behind it, the true equation behind it is that money provides you with insulation, or money really just, you know, equates to proximity. And what does proximity equate to? Equates to proximity over money. It's the way it is. And we have to start seeing that as a potential threat, not only to this particular conversation or to the particular, you know, subject of this conversation, but to the particular sovereignty of this country as a whole. We factored our entire capacity to really create any value internally to outsiders. We factored our entire capacity to create any value to historically white rich people. Why are we still sitting here and debating the issue of whether, you know, we have to actually just speak to private sector to give us some form of validation for the skills that we have? It's fundamentally flawed. The private sector doesn't have to do crap, nothing. They don't have to do anything for us because of the mere fact that at the point where I am sitting in a contest as a CEO of FNB or Standard Bank, and I see that, look, it doesn't matter if I've got 50 accountants in my department, but for the mere fact that there's a program that can automate that, I can easily just substitute that labor for that technology, and it would mean nothing. It would not be anything to anybody because we're just a private company operating peacefully. And that's why I agree with Zama so I think vehemently when he actually spoke about that, to say that we must stop treating you know, private sector with white gloves. This whole notion that, you know, we speak about stakeholders, but they're the only stakeholder that we really mean, is fundamentally flawed. It is fundamentally flawed. It poses a major risk on every one of us, the fact that we have major capital that can come in and deploy money in this country at will and really just basically have skin in the game. The mere fact that you can actually buy shares in South Africa, for instance, is for me just a conundrum that I've never understood. How you could actually do that and negotiate that for some form of investment you would actually expect a shareholding in the decision making of this country. That's ridiculous.
All right, thank you so much. Bongani?
I'm going to be short. As I said, that we can compare South Africa to China, we can compare South Africa to South Korea. It's all about understanding what is actually being compared. What we're comparing here is that those countries at some point in their lifespan were at a certain position and they took certain decisions in order to change things around. It has nothing to do with ownership of land, of certain things. It has everything to do with the resources that they had at their disposal at the moment. So now that's why it's important to understand things in context. For instance, if we are saying that South Africa spends on NSFAS alone about 30 to, I think NHLONIPHO can correct me on the figure, but about 30 billion rands each and every year, which then funds students in higher education, but then does not get the necessary yields from that expenditure. So that's what's being compared. That resource is there. It's there, it exists. It has nothing to do with owning land, a mountain, a giraffe. It's a resource that is there. We are saying that these countries use that 30 billion in that day and spend it wisely. And that's why they're the countries that they are today. So I think a context is everything and it has to be understood clearly. And then secondly, we can argue about what private sector is doing or not doing, or any other stakeholder is doing and not doing. But what we need to argue is that we have government. Government derives, or government establishes legislation, it establishes policies on how things must be done in that country. That's why we have government. So if we have a private sector that is not coming to the party, for instance, the question should not be to say, oh, let's fight this private sector because they're not doing what they're supposed to be. We should ask our government, what are you doing to ensure that this happens? Because in other countries, you can go to the US, you can go to China, you can even go to some African states, the government dictates what must happen. It's only in South Africa where, because we have politicians that are in bed with certain individuals or institutions, that the government becomes toothless or the state becomes toothless. So now, so we can, that's why it's always interesting. Like for instance, yesterday I see a match going to a JSE and I ask, why are you not going to maybe Nedlac? Because even when government, before it adopts policies, that sometimes they're discussed at Nedlac and government is represented in that space. And because of administrative law, at the end of the day, government will make the final decisions on how things must be done after consultation with stakeholders that will be impacted by that law. So it all boils down to the common factor here, which is government. So if a company A chooses to use maybe, let's say, to dilute its labor force with technology and digitalize its systems and digitize some systems, developing. What is our government saying? What is legislation saying? For example, now we have, I think we all would have seen the issues of immigration and labor. Like a lot of people are fighting now, people are taking law into their hands, but we have policies in South Africa that are not being enforced by our government. And now it's causing people to do as they please. So now, that's why I'm saying that if we want to be direct, if we're really interested about solving things, then let's go to where the problems emanate from the state. I said even earlier, that's why I think I would urge our listeners to listen to everything that I say, is that South Africa has progressive policies. For instance, I see young people, for instance, marching on the streets that scrap away experience, 8 years experience. Where am I going to get experience out of coming out of university? I don't have experience, what, and they march. But if you look into the Employment Equity Act, Section 20, subsection 2, 3, 4, 5, 2, 3, 4, and 5, it says that you can be employed in South Africa without experience, as long as you demonstrate that you can generate that experience within a reasonable amount of time. It doesn't say in 1 year, 2 years, it says a reasonable amount of time, which is something that you will discuss with your employer. So there's no need to march on the streets to say, why is the private sector saying they want 8 years experience? Why? Because there's already a policy that speaks to that. But then the same government is not enforcing its policies. So you'll fight the private sector, company A, because they're saying they want 10 years, but you're not speaking to the government. So now that's why I'm saying that you can run around as much as you like, but as long as we have that state that does not use that 30 billion wisely, that does not enforce its own laws properly to the benefit of its citizens, we'll be fighting wars that we should not be fighting. We'll be misdirecting our energies and we'll be spreading ourselves so wide and so thin that our impact becomes insignificant. Thanks.
I have picked up quite a lot of gaps that need to be addressed, and I also appreciate, as you were saying, Thabiso and Bongani, the fact that the fingers point back at government. As much as the private sector has a role to play, but government still has a role to play too. I'm hoping that when Zama speak and NHLONIPHO, they are going to be also indicating some solutions. Because for me, the quick wins will be to make sure that we spread the word or assist in a way to make sure that the graduates work together towards the community education that is spoke about, Thabiso, which is something that we need to work towards. Probably we were talking the other day about dependency on government. Look, it's a fact that we need to talk about the fees must fall. This must be implemented. It's something that needs to be, that government has to find a way, like you said, managing the 30 billion in a manner that will assist all the citizens and to the benefit of the citizens, and not necessarily having all the people having qualifications but not yielding back results as we would have expected. But at the same time, I'm just asking myself, is it not also the government's neglect of informing people about the policies that you are talking about the section that you are talking about, because many may not be aware of those sections that you are referring to. That's why they will go and march, because somebody has not done their work in terms of the what do you call it, like sort of educating the community or educating the public in itself, which is something that I think in our small spaces we can be able to do. I work for an organization that is supposed to be doing some of the community education or sort of educating the public about such sections, not necessarily the one you spoke about. But I think, yes, government is one of those that Department of Higher Education is actually one of those that is supposed to make sure that things are done according to book. All right, I just wanted to have your bite in terms of the, again, you can have your closing remark, but in a way, also touch base on the solutions that we need to be looking at. As an educator, what are the things that we're supposed to make sure we assist the public to, not the public only, also the graduates, to find a way of working together and do what Taviso also indicated, referring to community education, which can assist in making sure that everybody who is a graduate does not necessarily sit and not do anything.
Okay, so I would like to just say that I think the way forward that we can move is that our government, as Bongani said, is that it's toothless because it goes to bed with these institutions. But what should happen is that our government should take charge of the education system. As we speak, UJ, just UJ alone, received 15,000 of applications from students to do PGCE, that is a postgraduate certificate in education. These students, as you would know, it's because they have done a certain degree, maybe in biology, maybe in history and whatever. And now they see that there is no job that I can go to. Therefore, let me go and do teaching education so that I can be employable. And at that time, as we speak, the government has unfunded that PGCE. So I agree with Bongani a lot to say that our resources, let's redirect them to the right channels, to where the masses of our people will benefit and will have economic emancipation. So in that saying, I'm saying that if government wants to really to achieve this economic emancipation, I would say that certain degrees can be unfunded, and the ones that the academic degrees can be unfunded, and the ones that will drive towards economic emancipation be funded. Because if someone wants to be an academic, it means maybe they are more probably well-resourced and whatnot, so they can get funding somewhere or fund themselves to go through whatever that academia, because clearly they do not really need to be in the labor market, and therefore that means they probably afford to make a plan in terms of education. So what I'm saying is that the government, as it stands now, I don't fully disagree with the fact that they are funding certain unfunding certain degrees, but I'm saying that they must redirect their resources in the towards the degrees and certificates or diplomas that will go to the labor market and contribute to the economic emancipation of our country. Thank you.
Thank you. Zama, as you do your sort of a closing statement and also touching on the solutions, please also speak to the dysfunctional TVET colleges and sort of come up with ideas that can be taken along in terms of making sure that we make them more functional.
No, thank you very much. I think, my closing is 2 points. It's clear we don't have administrative capacity within our government. That's clear. No one disagrees with that we have a failing government. It's not an education issue, it's a health issue, it's a public transport issue. We don't have trains now, to just get to the city. That's the cheapest form of public transport, and our poorest can't even use it. Everyone knows Home Affairs is a crisis. So public institutions have administrative issues. No one can deny that. It's not a special issue of education. So that's the first point that we can blame the thing. But second thing, you can't now say that we agree that there's a thief, but the thief, we don't blame the thief. We blame the police for not catching the thief. Because that's what's happening here. People are saying, no, yeah. We see that the private sector is crashing our economy, and the fact that we haven't, the fact that we have, I mean, like reality, if we look at just economic matrices, and this is just simplifying the issues, that unemployment has risen in this country for the past 10 years, uninterrupted.
Yes.
Yeah, poverty has risen in this country, uninterrupted, for the past over decades. So we can't now say, okay, because our government, which is the police, that's supposed to guard this unregulated capital that we have in this country, and we say, okay, no, the problem is government. No. The problem is government for not catching the thief, but we're still going to beat up the thief. So the issue is that we must resolve it. We must resolve that. We have a government that has no administrative capacity to run the country. And we don't need to even, this is not a qualitative debate. This is go to a hospital, go to a train station, go to a public school. The things are just not working. Whether you like the government or not, but you don't want to be in that situation. And that's why as soon as you get out of the situation, you want to take your children to a private school, or you want to have medical aid, or you want to, buy a car, because I mean, you're not going to take a taxi. That's South African public transport is just a mess on its own. Mess, expensive, doesn't make sense. I mean, if you go to other countries, this what we're doing here is like crazy. So there's that point of that. When we come to TVET, and I go back to this point that government is a problem. It has no administrative capacity to create jobs, but the big people here who are supposed to be creating jobs are capital, and they are choosing not to. And because we lay so much of our trust, of our abilities to capital, when capital decides to go, that Trevor Noah jokes, the country is going and you guys are going the other side. That capital in this country has done that. It's devalued, wants to buy SOEs, it has done that. And the problem is that we must be able to, and that's the problem. One of the problems with the ANC and the government, they can't hold them accountable because they don't have administrative capacity and they can't regulate them, so they can do whatever they want. And then from time to time, we are told the rating agencies are chunking us down. The rand is falling, and then the other ANC person, no, will pick it up. So there's always this thing of saying, we must, whether we like it or not, whether we play politics or not, the elephant of the room is that the fact that there's people in this country who took our things less than 30 years ago, and they have never brought them back. Practically. No, like now, let's not joke, let's not play nice English. There are people who came here, took our things, took the land, owned the economy, on the best schools, on the best private education. They're in the JSE, they're in the, so we can't avoid that. You can't now say in a country where 80% of people are Black and they're 8% of the JSE, and you say you want transformation there. How? When the minority and minority race owns what we can do. So you can have the greatest of, so last point, you can have the greatest of ideas. You can have the greatest policies written down in documents. That will just be paper in the cabinets that just get us dust. To run a country, you need money. You need the economy. You need to dominate the commanding heights. You can give us your politics, you can give us your ideas, you can write the NDP, you can write what,
at the end of the day, people are going to ask, can you build a school? Because we have 80 children in a class. Can you make sure there's more nurses that we can pay salaries? We're sitting now, before Tito, the public sector wage bill was cut by 160 billion rands. The public sector can't hire anything. They can't hire teachers, they can't hire nurses, they can't hire FOCO, but they must run. There must be a government that runs, that must be capable, they must be administratively capable, they must make sure that there's doctors that heal the people, they must make sure that there's teachers who teach people. How are they going to teach the next generation of Black youth when the economy is not their hands? So people can come with many ideas, great. I mean, we're sitting here today in South Africa, people will tell you we have the greatest constitution in the world, we have progressive policies. The issue, even if you can raise the issue of saying it's an implementing issue, you don't have a government that has the capacity to implement. That's one point. But before that, even if they want to implement, they don't have the economic capacity. You go to any province, especially the rural provinces, you go there and say, why this hospital is not run well? A CEO of the hospital will tell you, oh, our budget was cut by government last year. Oh, so let's take it to the ground. Take it to the ground, talk to people, normal people on the ground. They won't tell you, no, it's a leadership issue, no, it's a qualitative issue. They will tell you, that's why when you have cancer and you stay in Limpopo, you stay in Northern Cape, you must take a transport to go to Joburg to get services in Charlotte Mackay. You know, so, but in private health, you can do it there. So now I'm saying that there's an economic freedom issue that we not want to address. And I want to throw a last bit on this, that even if we say we're transforming our education, that education, the universities are owned by white people. The profits that come from private education, UJ, Vets, UCT, what, all those thousands we feed there, they are owned by a few, 60. Actually, the last research was saying there were 10. They own the varsities, they own the hospitals, they own the mines, they own every profit that we give. So even when we say government must fund, our money falls to the same white people who say we want to fight. But maybe the revolution is not here yet. We must think about it later. Thanks.
I would have loved to see your face as you close those. I mean, your presentation when you have your closing remarks, but it's fine. Bongani, you want to have the last bite?
Oh, if graduates want to come together, graduates can do that easily. There are funds. We have the National Skills Fund. It exists, it's there, it's big money. And only a few people who know about it get to enjoy it. And politicians enjoy that people don't know about it because they get to then consume it. Because this fund it's generated from your Skills Levies Act or your skills levies, which are charged from all these companies where they pay 1% of their total remuneration amount. And that money goes straight to DHEAD. So it doesn't come through the means of treasure. So it doesn't come through the fiscus. Hence, it's politicians like that money because it doesn't have as much regulation and oversight as money that comes from the fiscus, and they can then consume the money. So graduates can come together, get that funding and do something for their communities. They can even establish what we call a CET, which is a Community Education and Training Center. DHEAD must fund it. So we have progressive policies, but not being implemented. Secondly, my closing remark, when we say, the only thing I agree with is that when we say government does not have administrative capacity, I remember when I was a student leader, before NHLONIPHO, I would tell Blade that you don't have it. You don't, your DGs, they don't know what they are doing because it's the DG who must ensure that administratively an institution is sound. So you have DGs that are politicians and not administrators. But we must hold government accountable. And part of holding government accountable is when we go to elections, like what we have seen on the 1st of November, 2021. That's people voting with their feet, people showed that they're holding government accountable, and you are seeing in certain spaces things are changing because of that. So you can chase the thief yourself and murder them, whatever yourself, but that thief will shoot you and you will die, because it's not your job to be doing so. So we must put blame where blame should be put. Thirdly, is that if we are still complaining that there are insufficient resources in a country that spends over 1 trillion each year in budget, then that says a lot. Because if we have over 1 trillion of resources, and it goes back to my earlier point, it has nothing to do about owning the sea and the fishes within the sea. That trillion is there, it exists. But that trillion is not being spent to the benefit and the advancement of the people of this country. So when you go to that hospital clinic and they say there's no money, but then there's a trillion that was just announced. I mean, I can make a reference point in the last, in Tito's last midterm policy statement, midterm budget policy statement, said about 100 or 600 something odd million would be used in order to get social workers. And I forgot, yeah, and early childhood practitioners. That's money that was put aside. The question we must ask, where's that money? That money has nothing to do with fishes and owning giraffes. It's there, but it's not reaching where it must reach. So resources are there. But because we have people that are in positions of power and not interested in advancing our people, that's why we then have to be now chasing thieves ourselves. But then we are not saying, let's remove these people. We have an opportunity. In 2024, we'll have another opportunity to remove these people and put people in place that do care about us, that will use that over 1 trillion rands, which I think is the highest for any African state. But we have the highest unemployment for any African state, in fact, in the world, that will use it wisely for our mobility. So now, up until we then ask those questions, up until we then conduct ourselves that way, nothing will change. I heard you said earlier about the employment equity plan. Government must educate people. Government, yes, must educate people, but more importantly, must enforce. Because it goes back to the point I said on immigration. Now we have political parties, community movements that are doing government's job. They are going to shops, enforcing immigration laws because the government is not doing so. It's only now, we see him on media. We've never seen him before. Now reacting to what people are doing for themselves, because nature does not allow for a vacuum. If you don't lead people, people will lead themselves and there'll be chaos. And we have seen chaos taking place. There are also civil movements that we need to applaud that have been holding government accountable. Whether we like it or not, about outer. Yes, they are white and they have a litigation budget of over 3 billion. But we have benefited from that, because if it was not for those institutions whom are championing their own interests, we would be paying e-tolls now. Whereas we have a collapsed public transport system that forces us to buy cars when we don't want to buy cars. So now we would be also paying e-tolls over and above the installments and insurances that we're paying. So we're saying such civil movements must come and assist the country. So there's so many things that need to be done, but I'm saying that as much as the challenges before us are great, but all these challenges are not things that can't be resolved. And it's not challenges that we can't start now in finding resolutions for them. So as I said, like if you want, graduates can go to Monday to the head and say, we want to do this, give us the funds to do so. So that's something you can do in the immediate, in the short run. And then there would be long run things that you can do, which is waiting for 2024 in order to cast your vote. But so many things can be done. And we must put blame where blame should be, because when we want in planning, when we want to really solve a problem, because this is what we always find as a challenge, is that we are quick to find solutions that are not sustainable, and it forces us to now find solutions of solutions, which is a duplication of effort on the basis that the diagnosis was incorrect. So now, if we then move on to the secondary issues, as I said, fighting a standard bank, for instance, because that's what our diagnosis gave us. And we say as a quick recommendation, let's fight them. But then we leave people that are actually screwing up. Then trust me, we will come back to the planning table a few in the immediate, and then want to find another solution for that. So now let's properly diagnose, and then let's go to where we should be going, because also we are fighting a system of which we don't have adequate resources to fight. So as I said, we can't be spreading ourselves too thin. because when you spread yourself too thin, too wide, the impact reduces as you spread yourself. So now that's basically what I wanted to say, but I would also like to have these debates continuing. And in fact, there should be debates, because invited here, I didn't think it would be a debate, but these debates should be there because they're also ideological debates. And when we come and come with this ideological debate, they must also be beefed up by empirics to say, let's put the facts and figures on the table. Practically, let's put things on the table. For instance, I went to my HR HOD, where I work, the local, on Tuesday, and I asked her, why are you not implementing the Employment Equity Act? And then I found that this person was speaking off the cuff. It was like a pedestrian conversation. It's a taxi rank. They did not even know that these laws exist, but the person is HR. And then you obviously get interested as to how was this person employed? And then that's where you see why we need to change things in 2024, if we are serious about saving this country. So now we have a responsibility as citizens of this country, not just in higher education, but in all spaces. But then if we don't do anything, and even these platforms are also part of that. If we don't do anything, we will be witnesses of our country going down the drain like many other countries before ours. So to me, it starts and it ends with government. They have all the resources. 1 trillion, you can take any company to court and win. So that's just me, and thanks for the opportunity.
Wow. Thank you so very much. I actually don't even want to sum up everything that you have said, because I wrote like almost 7 pages of the things that you have been saying, and I'll go back and listen again to the recording. We're gonna put it on YouTube and also on Facebook, and also partly the link on Twitter and also Instagram on our platforms. I cannot thank you enough, and I hope that next time when we had higher education, you'll also be available for us to have this discussion further. Yeah, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Are We Transforming? We're having Bongani Mahlangu, NXUMALO, and Zamam Tunzi. They were assisting us in discussing a topic, these qualifications that we are having in higher education institutions still relevant, or it's just the paper that matters? And the discussion actually unpacked the fact that not all the qualifications are irrelevant. It's just the way in which we sort of position ourselves to be able to assist and deal with the gaps that we are identifying in our communities. But over and above that, there's a need for us to identify those critical skills that will respond to what the market needs for those who want to be employed. I really cannot thank you enough for having made time, but I appreciate the fact that without you knowing me, you saw it important to come and have this discussion. We have come to the end of our session, and this is Are We Transforming? Looks like we still have a long way to go. But thank you, and you must have a very good evening. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and also follow and like our LinkedIn and Facebook page. See you next time.